Hello, my name is Miguel Babanco, and welcome to the new special program, Lessons from Ferguson. We're here to talk about how Ferguson has provoked public discussion about community relations with law enforcement. Our goal today is to find ways the community can create better relations with law enforcement and how we can plug in with what we have learned from there. So with us today we have Bryson White, a community organizer with PICO, Rebecca Rangel, a community activist and educator, and via video link joining us from Missouri is Brittany Farrell. So thank you all for being here with me today. So to start off, I'd like to ask a question of Brittany. Can you give us a brief overview of the incident in Ferguson that created national news? What happened there?
Well, what happened was on August 9th, the murder of 18-year-old Michael Brown in the Canfield Green apartment complex by the Ferguson Police Department. And Michael Brown was an unarmed teenager at that, and that was the catalyst for everything that has occurred since then. There was a lot of protests following his murder because it was another unjust killing of a black man, and that was just enough. Like, people were fed up. So we took to the streets of West Florissant. We protested night and day, and we were met with police brutality initiated by Ferguson Police Department, and other municipalities later came and contributed to the brutality of the protesters. There were a lot of they were militarized at that, and and it was all, if you ask me, about control. People were very upset at the death of this young man who was unarmed, and by witness testimony, not a threat to Darren Wilson, other than being a black man in tall stature, So, with that, there's been a lot of the violation of human rights, of the rights of the people who live in this country, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble. Those rights have been violated by law enforcement. So now where we are, we're still dealing with a lot of, it's a lot of confusion as to what's happening behind closed doors. Darren Wilson is still not arrested. We don't know where he is. All we saw is the photo that's been floating around media. So he's on paid vacation, still being paid. We're still, as community organizers, as people in the community, we're still strategizing, trying to come up with different ways to have our voices heard, to let them know that we are not going away until we get justice for this young man. We want McCullough out. We don't trust his biases. We want a complete, we want this whole criminal justice system as it is now to be revamped. We want Ferguson PD. We need to see changes in the police department. So it's a lot of actions that are being taken currently as a result of this young man's death.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds like a powerful thing that's happening there, and it's very vital that change happens, not just there, but I'd like to bring it home right now and talk about Fresno. So with you two being here from Fresno, how do you feel about something like that happening in Fresno? Is that something that could ever happen?
Yeah, yeah, I would say that is something that could happen in Fresno. The ingredients in terms of some of the disconnect between the police department on the ground with the residents of the city of Fresno. The amount of officer-involved shootings of people of color in the city of Fresno is leading to lots of frustration on behalf of residents in neighborhoods where people of color are residing. And there's a distrust between people of color and law enforcement here in our city. I mean, just last year we saw Fresno Police Department roll what we would call a tank down Strada Avenue in response to some threats laid out towards law enforcement. So we do know that that Fresno PD is also militarized, as are most police departments in this country. And we do know that there are issues of unjustified shootings in Fresno, what we would call unjustified shootings in Fresno, and tensions between residents and law enforcement. So there is a potential of that happening in Fresno. Briefly, one thing that Fresno, I think, has that Ferguson doesn't have is that the leaders in Fresno typically have better relationships with the higher-ups in law enforcement. So there might be a space in which if something were to be, those tense moments were to arise, for people to reach across the aisle and have conversations. But on a resident level, the powder keg potentially is there.
Wow. So we know that public demonstration and free speech are a part of our heritage, they're a part of our culture. But what do we need to do to have successful demonstrations that create meaningful discussion? This is open to anyone.
Well, I just came back from a conference in Kansas City just last night with an organization called National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And what I came away with, which is not new information, but it's sort of a new way to look at the old information, and that is, and we were talking about it earlier, Miguel, about how many organizations in Fresno are doing almost the identical same work, but with different points of view. And that's really education around situations with the PD, whatever that situation has been, that conflict, that confrontation or issue, and getting people to start working more together. So I'm actually, I canceled a trip to the Bay Area this afternoon to be here because I'm starting to focus and paying more attention to that. So starting to get people to talk to each other. I mean, there's PICO, there's Brown Berets, there's a Hmong organization, there's an El Salvadorian organization, there's people that work, there's Criminal Justice Committee. I could go on and on. There's plenty of organizations, but why aren't we working as a unit? That's the $64 question.
Yeah, so I would say even deeper than demonstrations, it's about organizing our communities. And so organizing our communities is what's going to have lasting effects. Demonstration might be an expression of that or an entry point into that. But I think one of the ways in which organizing our communities functions is really empowering people to vote as one aspect of community organizing. And that matters because if we have voting power, then we're putting people or removing people from office who do not reflect our values. And in doing so, that can also have an effect in terms of how the police culture is shifted if we have people in the top who actually reflect our community values.
Yeah, definitely. So I think you mentioned a little bit about this, but I'd like to touch upon this, Rebecca, about what is the Central California Criminal Justice Committee and what do they do?
Yes, it's actually related to a piece of what Bryson just said, which is Central California Criminal Justice Committee has been in existence for 20 years. I've been with them for 15. And in a nutshell, what we did prior to getting the independent auditor for Fresno, which was our goal, is to have forums throughout the city, educating people about their rights, informing them about what they could do if they had issues that came up with the PD, specifically excessive force issues or just concerns, stopped by the police and being treated rudely, just two examples. So Criminal Justice Committee now meets to continue to meet with the independent auditor. I'm on the Police Chief's Advisory Board reporting back what's going on there as well as the community. We actually have people who call us with community issues because we've been around a long time. And fielding those questions, getting them legal assistance, representation, finding them correct resources for whatever their issues are. But more, every single time we talk to somebody, we look at it as an opportunity to educate. The most important thing, besides getting the auditor, is in '07, I went to a NACO conference in Santa Clara and came back with a system that someone presented from Seattle on mediation. So me and Sergeant Newton presented it to the chief. He sent a team out to review it. Again, all of this in '07. From '07 to 2012, Councilman at that time, Westerlin, put together a PowerPoint presentation, presented it several times to City Council, and got it accepted. How awesome is that? Now we have a mediation system for Fresno. But then, similar to your issue we were talking about earlier, City told us we didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So what we did is we did a comparison analysis and found out that we're spending millions of dollars a year on litigation.
Yeah, and
So-
that's obviously a problem,
That's-
and that's something that we need to address. We're going to take a moment to have a short break and look at the video that has young people from Fresno giving us their input on this issue and what they think about those relationships, police-community relationships. So if we could just do that now.
Sometimes I feel like cops judge me by how I look. Like, there was one time in school I was wearing sweatpants and something was going on, and they right at the back said, "Oh, come here, did you have something to do with this?" And I was like, "No, just because I'm wearing sweatpants doesn't mean that I'm gonna go fight." But I just feel like, they're bullies to everyone.
There's this gap, I would say, that there's never been a chance where, normal citizens can, necessarily touch bases with the law enforcement to get to know each other.
If you see teenagers dressing basically like emo, goth, somewhere around those lines, or sagging, police, some of them would like pay attention more to them than to others, the ones that dress all nice and look innocent from the face.
You see the cops where they're like just really rude, and it's like they don't they see you differently than they would see like another cop. Like, basically they see you as somebody who's lower than them, and they judge you for not being like as high as them.
I've known that, just some police that go into our school that we talk to, for events or anything like that, they're nice people. Somebody says, "Oh, I'm a police officer." You're gonna have this idea, it's like, "Oh, this guy's probably, he's probably gonna look at me in a different way." But if you get to know them personally wise, and some of the things that they have to do in their own personal life, you get to see them more as an individual, without that uniform. It's like you see a person as another individual, and not somebody that, when you're wearing your police uniform, that's a suspect. That's where a lot of, relationships can be built.
We see how they treat other people, so it's like, wow, this is how we're supposed to be looking up to these people, and this is how they're treating us. Like, we're no different than them. They should be treating us the same way as they treat each other, not treating us different just because we're citizens and they're the law, so they think that they could harass other people. He thought I was illegal. He thought I was from Mexico. He's like, "Oh, are you hiding anyone in the ice chest?" And I'm like, "No." And he told me to get out the car, and was basically like judging me just because of what I was wearing and how I looked. And he says, "Are you hiding anyone in the car?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And he gave me a ticket. And I've never even gotten in trouble in my life. I would just ask, why can't they see us like we see them, like as human beings? And that they see us like as the scum off the feet, and we see them as something high. Why can't we get the same respect? I just feel like you shouldn't judge someone, like, no matter what. You could be a white person and you could still be as bad as a black person. You shouldn't judge someone by how they look. And I don't understand why they do that. I feel like if they see a guy with tattoos, then a guy with not tattoos, they're gonna get the guy with tattoos because they think that he has something to do with crime, than a guy with no tattoos at all.
My idea, I think, would be, to just have events where everybody can talk to each other in a friendly way, where there's no reason for people to say something that can get them, incriminated or anything like that. Where it's just that everybody's on an equal, common ground.
We don't want the community to feel afraid of the police. We want them to we want them to feel safe.
So that video kind of illustrated some of the sentiments that are expressed by a lot of the young people here in Fresno and their relationship and attitudes towards the police. And what I'd like to do at this moment is, unfortunately Brittany was not able to see that video, but I'd like to ask her input for how relationships are moving forward with police in Ferguson. Are they moving forward, or is that something that you still struggle with? It seems like it was.
No, relationships with the Ferguson police, they're not moving forward. They're not moving anywhere right now. There's a complete distrust in the community right now, and rightfully so, because, I mean, of Ferguson would have been shot at and gassed by the people that are supposed to protect and serve them. There's no coming back from that right now. You know, I don't think there's any easy way to mend the relationship that was never there between Ferguson PD and the community.
Yeah, that's obviously something that we can see here in Fresno as well. Maybe not to that extent, but it's something that has been an issue, and that's something that a lot of the young people feel. They feel that disconnect, they feel fear, persecution, a lot of those things, and that's something that no community should feel about the people who are supposed to protect and serve them. Something I do want to say is that we did reach out to both Fresno County Sheriff's Office and Fresno Chief Dyer's office to appear on this special show, but they were not available. We would have loved their involvement in this discussion. We see from that video that many young people have complicated views of the police. We want to engage the discussion further and address the cry for mutual respect that the young people are asking for. That was one of the big things that we heard a lot from young people, is that they feel they're not being treated fairly, they feel like they're not being respected, they see that persecution. And what are some of the things that we can do to create better communications and relations with our law enforcement, not just here, but what are some of the ideas that people in Ferguson have to kind of mend the harm that's been done? So anybody can chime in on this one. Brittany?
Well, you know, for me, I would think that that's a hard question to answer. Like, what can be done? Because I don't know if the people that are currently there will be able to do what needs to be done successfully, because they've already kind of destroyed
the trust.
You know, their trust. Yeah. I think moving forward, let's say they get a whole new PD, right? Let's say they get all new officers in the PD, right? I think it will start with actually engaging with the people that they serve and protect, outside of pulling them over and giving them tickets, you know, outside of profiling them, frisking them, making them sit on the curb to search their vehicles. You know what I'm saying? Like, mind you, the demographic of Ferguson and the demographic of the PD, it's 53 officers, Ferguson PD, 3 of them are African American. Ferguson is what, 60% African American, 63%?
No, 65.
65% African American. You see what I'm saying? So that's a problem. And that also needs to be looked at. The demographic of the police force. How can the police force better know the community that they serve? You know, to kind of bridge those gaps in communication. You have to know the people, like you have to know the culture, or at least have some type of awareness of it. And then you have to engage with them. You know, you have to develop positive relationships. And I don't see that being done right now with the people that are there. It will have to be completely.
Well, it's been happening recently, but it's been forced.
Yeah, like the recent efforts, the haze, the small conversations, it has been forced because now they see what they have to do. But I can't see it being done successfully right now.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the pieces is that our law enforcement has to cease seeing our youth in a negative light inherently, right? You know, so we saw in the video that all of our young people had something negative to say about our police force, and the majority of young people of color tend to have a similar view here in the city of Fresno. For those officers who are in fact doing their job properly, they also get hit with that bad rap. But I think that we need to, our law enforcement has to be able to build relationships with youth of color, to be able to humanize them and to not exist, for them not to see them in kind of just a criminalized light in which many of them operate within our communities under that mindset. So,
I would hate to think that those 3 youth or the young people that were interviewed are quote unquote representative of all youth in Fresno. I don't think that's the case. I think that the last young man that spoke nailed it, which is building relationships with the police. We recently got 2 police officers assigned full-time to the Tower District, for example, that are on bicycles. So that really forces them to be more interactive with the community, and that's a good move. But I think being on the ground, boots on the ground, walking in the communities is critical. It needs to happen more. What I've learned is that if the only time you see an officer is when there's an incident, then that's, I mean, how will, as a young person, how would I relate to that person? Well, you're going to think trouble, guy in the blue uniform. So it's not conducive to building positive relationships. But the potential is there. I say get the police in the schools. We've got, I think, 1 or 2 assigned, but I mean more intensive in terms of building those communications and relationships. I mean, there's an organization, for example, in West Fresno called Building Broken Neighborhoods, and they do some great work. Police are involved, but it's not enough. It's sort of, I call it a Band-Aid effect. You know, you've got a bleeding artery and you put a bandage on it, and it's never enough.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about why that exists, because oftentimes we see that young people do have only those negative experiences with police. We see that they are only in contact with them when there's things like arrests, there's things like stops, frisking, things like that happening. And oftentimes we say that young people need to learn how to behave and act when questioned and stopped by law enforcement. That's a common narrative. You know, what are the things they should do? What are the things they should not do? Now, do you think that young people know what to do? And an even more important question is, should this be something that they should even have to worry about?
So I think that first I would like to say that I would disagree with my sister in the sense of I do think that it was, that tape is representative of young people in Fresno. As someone who has worked with young people as a youth pastor and as a college pastor, the majority of people of color, young people of color in which I interact with, all have negative encounters and views of law enforcement here in the city. And not just with Fresno PD, I would, in conversation with folks across the state, that's in a lot of different cities as well. So I think, but what you said in terms of the first contact with law enforcement and the consistent contact with law enforcement can't be something negative. It has to be something, there has to be a space in which law enforcement and youth will be able to interact in positive ways, because the reality is our young people's, their first touch with law enforcement typically is a negative piece. I do think we need to engage our young people of color in terms of how to interact with law enforcement. Not because not because they're doing it in maybe an improper manner, but just because the reality of the world that we live in, that sometimes our law enforcement officers are gunning down unarmed people. So how do we engage our youth when confronted with law enforcement in a way in which to try at best to avoid that situation when law enforcement is trigger happy in our communities. And so it's not to place the blame on our young people, it's just to try to coach and engage in terms of the reality of the situation in the world that we live in. So I do think there's a space.
My point of view is actually a little bit different, and I'd like to share that.
Before we get into that, I'd like to ask for any input from Brittany, because you know we are talking via video conference. So I want to make sure that we have your input as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was listening to what Bryson said, and I agree. Like, you don't want to completely place the blame on young people, but you do want to teach them, and you want to teach them how to deal with law enforcement in terms of how it's I don't want to say forced on them, but what they're subjected to just naturally by being young and by being in communities where there are people of color and they're majority people of color. I mean, unfortunately, they're subjected to a different type of treatment, and you just want to teach them how to. You want them to be knowledgeable of how to interact with, you know, their authorities. You want to educate them and make sure that they're well equipped. I don't think that is something that everybody has to deal with. I don't think that that's everything that that's something that everyone has to be educated with. Obviously, you know, there are people of more privilege that don't have to worry about teaching their sons how to interact with authorities, you know, and that's a problem. But I do think that it's important for us as leaders and for those that are older in the community to reach out and educate and empower the youth in the way that will help them effectively be able to exist in the communities that they live in with all people, law enforcement and the everyday community people that are with them, you know. So I feel like it's a I wouldn't say it's a giant of a task. It can be done. It just takes effort from all people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a collaborative effort. One of the things, a recurring theme, we need to really band together to tackle some of these huge issues. Very quickly, I just want to give each one of our guests an opportunity to have a final word. I believe our goal is to keep the community safe and have a healthy relationship with our law enforcement agencies. Ultimately, I think that's something we'd all like to see. So just any final thoughts, any final words that you'd like to leave us with?
Final words: organize, organize, organize. We have to organize our communities. We have to empower people to vote. We have to empower people to hold our elected officials accountable. And we have to put people in office who have share our values. And we have to build proper relationships with law enforcement authorities so these things don't continue to happen.
Yes, and then also, too, the issue of education is critical because a Brookings Institute wrote a report a few years ago called, it was on poverty in the United States, and it referred to Fresno. National study referred to Fresno as the Appalachia of the West. So we've got a high population of very poor people, and then we've got a few people managing the community. So involvement is critical, stepping up, pretending like you don't belong, or people, you know, Democratic Party, great example. Highest registration, higher than the Republicans, but we don't vote. What is that? So that's part of the tool in trying to get people to see that it is in their self-interest to show up, to step up, to speak up, instead of saying, well, yeah, just, you know, I'm just one person.
Definitely. Brittany, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Organize, take action, educate yourself. Know why we're doing this. You know, understand that systematic oppression is real, and we will continue to organize and to fight against it until it's over. Like, and even if it takes another 50 years, you know, like this is not something that we can ignore. We have to understand that the people of color in this country have been oppressed for years. You know, whether it's subtle or not, you know, but with the recent events that have happened, there is no way that we can play respectability politics and act like, you know, like there are not people out here that needs to be held accountable. Like this is not a race issue. It is, and we're all in it together. We're all in it together. Solidarity is very important right now. You know, we don't have time to sit and point the finger. We need to stand in solidarity and continue to take action and continue to organize. We have a job to do, and it's a really big job.
Thank you. Thank you for those final words. We want to thank all of you for joining us for our special piece inspired by the tragedies and struggles from Ferguson. The No Youth Media is an organization that gives voices to young people in Fresno. Please visit us at www.thenofresno.org. Thank you.